Yeah.
In the following sense. The organism idea is one about synergies of systems, and that's of course what you were also talking about in terms of happiness. So one of the real questions is if we have a map, a multi-map with many systems, whether it's connectomic map or something else, and then map that onto how it's synergized in different parts of the world, or how much the synergies are there, how much things are working together or working apart. We get a sense of differential health that's linked with, directly linked with system linkage. And you know, how things are, so we were just talking about wealth disparity. Wealth disparity is associated with certain kinds of flow relationships, where some information or some materials go some ways but not other ways. And so to some extent these are linked, and the notion of health and system integration are obviously going to be linked. And it's one thing that we can do in this process, irrespective of larger noosphere ideas, but just simply to get at the question, how do these systems link up in synergistic or in a sense antagonistic ways?
The noosphere, the planet, needs to be aware of itself in some way. And then that data has to flow, and we have all the issues we have with big data, who owns it, who controls it, who's accountable for it, what we can do with it. And then it needs to start to integrate those different, you know, people who, the telephone system with the road system, you know, these systems all work together. So there's, even in the representation, which is what I call this, that representation has to be integrated. And then the third step, long term, not initially, for the reasons you mentioned, would be to actually use that in some ways to predict, to anticipate, to simulate. And so that simulation is very, very difficult, but our own efforts to do a mapping of the brain, which we want to then use to help us simulate the brain, we'll learn how to do these very large-scale simulations, very complicated ones with multiple high dimensions and all these other issues. That's a longer-term project. But the first part is to actually capture all this in real time, and it's data. It's not, doesn't exist as a map, even though there's geography there. It's useful and necessary for us to do the things that we want to do at the planetary scale, right? I mean, so I don't see how we can do large-scale things for the planet, how we can manage the climate, unless we are monitoring the climate globally. We can't increase the health of the planet unless we can monitor everything. And so that monitoring, again, it's essential that it be in real time as much as possible, and that it be global, planetary, scale.
Right.
So that as we do work at the planetary level, and that's the, to me, that's the goal of making a noosphere, is we want to create things at a civilizational scale of participation.
Yeah.
I agree with David that the unit is a small group, but the scope or the ambition is to do things at the scale we've never been able to do before.
Right.
And that's sort of what all these communication tools are about. We've had a long term in making things with small groups. We have done that, we know, intuitively we feel that. The prospect before us is that for the first time, we can make something at the planetary scale.
Yes.
We could make a brain, we could geoengineer climate, but we also could do things like, you know, make an education system that touched every single person on this planet and enabled each person born to exercise their gifts and share it. Those kinds of things we can now do working together with 8 billion people. How do we have 8 billion people collaborate? Well, we're going to invent some of those tools of collaboration.
Yeah.
That's part of what making the noosphere is going to be about, is about inventing these new tools and collaborating at a new scale that we couldn't even think about before. There's no way to get 8 billion people in one room, but now we can put 8 billion people in one room.
Let me write David.
The other thing is all these things will cost a lot of effort, they will cost a lot of research, they will cost a lot of of collaboration, what you need to do is to create a political momentum for that. That means you need to create a story that people will find appealing and say, yes, we should do that. And that is for me what the point here is, that we need to create this narrative or this visualization that will convince the ordinary citizen that yes, we should invest money into building all these kind of systems. Because these systems are being built at very small scale and not coordinated, and there is not enough resources. But you need to first create a political will to have these systems at the global level, and that I think is the first point, is to get this idea of the global superorganism or North Sea or whatever as a narrative, a meaningful narrative that gives people a sense of yes, we should be doing all these things.
Well, Paul, yesterday you were talking about the origin story, which is this. Doesn't that get back to what we were talking about yesterday of the what? What's the what? Because the origin story and the narrative, people get behind a great story, obviously, but the story has to have something that's understandable and believable. And generally, in large groups, they don't. If you say, "Here's the paradigm in which you live and you understand," and here's a new paradigm, it's too. If the chasm is too big, they're not going to make the jump. So, isn't that kind of what we were talking about yesterday? Is how do you mold the identity that is similar enough, almost like what you were talking about, Bill, with reflexive facial reactions, that we can see ourselves in this other thing.
We should all
That's right.
embrace, however terrible it is, but we have to also be able to drop a little bit academic hesitation and understand that the rubber meets the road somewhere and has to meet the road today, because we need to act, and that goes beyond deliberation, and at times also means you just have to understand where your assumptions lay and go with it and try it out. But we really have an urgent problem to solve. Also for you, with this deadline of 2030, I think is very useful, because indeed, gentlemen, we don't have that much time, and lady. So let's also, for the last part of this discussion, I think, keep it in the back of our mind. At the end of the day, I really feel we must have concrete commitments to interventions, the real stuff we can really do.
Right. A runaway process has to be met by another one. And the predator prey, I think, is helpful. But in terms of our project here, we need, I mean, one way to think about what we're doing is, if we have a compelling third story that has values built into it, and one of them is that the technology has developed to a place where we can have a really great life with a small use of energy. I mean, not going back to, not going back exactly to the 1920s or the 1890s, right? But actually, a rich life, using the internet and the kind of the cultural creativity that's possible. That seems like something that could take hold in humans, and they see this as something really worth striving for.
Came up during our talk, mapping well-being, and that really our end goal is to increase well-being and to do it at a broad scale. And so just to remind ourselves that that's an important thing to do. And then multi-level mapping, that although we want to have a planetary map, we also want to be able to zoom in. And it's at the smaller scales that this will probably be most useful, because on the one hand, people need to be citizens of the Earth. There has to be a primary identity in order to put that into action. And also psychologically, they also need to be citizens in their immediate localities. And so to develop, to map well-being, and to have maps at the level of the small groups where people are actually working to get things done, all the way up to their towns, their cities, their neighborhoods, and so on. there's a lot.
Well, I thought one of the most compelling ideas in terms of making the map really exciting was talking about happiness and health. And,
Yes,
you know, and then also when Terry made the point that there's a correlation between when the systems are integrated and the occurrence of lots of happiness and health. Everybody's interested in that.
Yeah.
And so it's like evidence of the noosphere in action, right?
Yes,
Okay, but also then tying it to what Paul was saying in terms of maximum entropy production, right? So if you had a map that would show a correlation between the presence of the second story, right, and the maximum entropy production. So it would be linking the second story into the destruction of the earth.
With the destruction.
Yeah, so it'd be part of the deconstruction. So we start to see like, whoa.
Yeah.